welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have another book review for you, and that is for Star Wars: The New Jedi Order, Force Heretic 3 Reunion by Sean Williams and Shane Dix. This is the 17th book of the New Jedi Order series and the final book of the Force Heretic trilogy. So this is one of the final books in the series, so I was very much looking forward to reading it. I've been working on this series for a long time, so I'm really trying to get through it. And I was going into this one with low expectations, but hoping I'd enjoy it. If you've seen my reviews of the first two Force Heretic books, you would know I did not love those books very much. In fact, I would say that individually they were my least favorite books in the whole series. But I had heard from several people that this was the best book in the trilogy and that I would probably enjoy it a bit more. And I always go into every book that I read, hoping to enjoy it anyway. So I was really hoping that this one would stick the landing for me. Thankfully, I enjoyed this one much more than the first two. In fact, this is, I think, significantly better than the first two books for me. So to get into some good stuff of this book, which there's quite a few things. First things first, I really like the character work in this book. I think the character work in here is really strong with most of the characters. Like, all the characters I think are written very well, are all done very well. In particular, for standouts, Pelion is in this book pretty prominently, and I really enjoyed him here. I always enjoy seeing him. He's great in this book. I really enjoyed the planet of Zonoma Sakat, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, but you get kind of the person side of the planet because it's like a sentient planet. That was really good. I really enjoyed that. The standout for me in this book, though, was Tahiri. Now, Tahiri is a character in the New Jedi Order that has been prominently featured throughout the series, but I never really got into her character until the Force Heretic trilogy. And despite my gripes with the first two books and not quite loving those, I do think that all of these three books got me more invested in Tahiri as a character. And I think especially in this book, I loved the way that she was handled in this book. I really enjoyed her arc throughout it and just the stuff that was happening with her. Because earlier in the series, basically, she was kind of turned over to the Yuuzhan Vong in some way. And then since then, she's kind of had this, she has herself, and then she also has this alternate Yuuzhan Vong personality that's trying to come out. And across this trilogy, you've had her kind of fighting between those two things and trying to, not let the Yuuzhan Vong side of her take over. And this book follows through very heavily on that in ways that I really enjoyed. And that was like my favorite thing in this book, I would say, was Tahiri, which was surprising because I enjoyed her in the other books, but I really, really liked her in this trilogy and in this book specifically. I also really enjoyed the world building in this book. The first two books, kind of what they're doing is like leading up very directly to this book. In this book, the characters, at least some of the characters, finally get to the planet of Zonoma Sakat, which they were trying to find in the second book. This book, they finally get there. And this is a planet that's very unique. As I said earlier, it's like a sentient planet. So it has like its own personhood to it, which is interesting. And I love the world building of it because it is like a living planet. And that is just really interesting. And I love the way that the world building was handled, the way that the people who live on this planet were handled, the way that Sakat himself was handled. All that stuff was really cool. This book, I would say, if you are interested in reading this trilogy, if you're reading New Jedi and you get to this trilogy, I would recommend going and reading the book Rogue Planet prior to reading this trilogy, because that book directly ties in specifically to this book. There are many points where that book is actually referenced very directly, and I don't think it's like 100% necessary, but if you're able to read that book first, I would recommend doing so. I read that book before reading this one because of that reason, and I think that this book was a little bit stronger for it. But I really love the tie-ins that it has with that book. I always love seeing like stuff in the EU, like tying together between different books. It's just really cool. It's one of my favorite things about the EU is seeing all the different ways things come together. It's really cool. But just the world building of Zonoma Sakat, I really enjoyed. I really liked a lot of the other stuff that was going on with this book as well. Like you have Han and Leia doing stuff, you have Luke and Mara Jade and Jason Solo. They're the ones like going to like Sonoma Sakat doing their thing, and the dialogue and discussions in this book also I really liked, especially towards the end of the book. You have Luke, and there's a specific like sequence where Luke and Jason are talking to the planet Sonoma Sakat at the same time, in different locations, and the discussions that these characters have with one another I thought was very interesting, and I really enjoyed that about it. There was just a lot of, I always really enjoy when Star Wars books like get some really interesting bits of dialogue that can really elevate a story for me. For example, like some time back when I read Yoda Dark Rendezvous, that was a really good book, but the dialogue at the end of that book elevated it even slightly higher for me, to the point that I really loved it. And the same thing happened here, where it's like I really enjoyed this book a lot, but towards the end, where there was these really interesting discussions about things and this interesting dialogue between characters and things like that, that really elevated the book for me. And I really enjoyed that a lot. So a lot of really cool stuff in here that I enjoyed. If I did have any complaints about this book, I do think that the Yuuzhan Vong storyline was not as interesting, specifically relating to Nominor, who has been kind of conspiring over the course of several books. And I enjoyed his stuff in this book, but it was not like, anytime I read it, I was not like, oh, I'm so excited to read this part of the book, like I have been in past books. It was interesting, it was cool, but it was not the highlight for me, which it kind of has been in past books. So that was a little bit disappointing, but it wasn't a big issue because I loved everything else. Everything else in this book I thought was really fun. So overall, I really enjoyed this book quite a lot more than the first two in the trilogy. I'd say it just about makes up for them in some ways. I do think that the other two books had a good build-up to this one, but I think this one is definitely the strongest by a long shot. So as far as a rating out of 10 that I would give Reunion, I would give it an 8.5 out of 10. I really liked it a lot. Probably one of the stronger books in the New Jedi Order for me overall, despite the fact that the trilogy in general is not as strong for me. But going just by a single book basis, this is one of the stronger books in the series for me, I would say. I really enjoyed it a lot. This had a lot of cool stuff going on in it. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all I got for my review. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this one, if you have read it, if you enjoyed it or not, if it's also your favorite in the trilogy or not, and what you thought of the Force Heretic trilogy in general. I'm really looking forward to finishing up New Jedi Order. I've got 2 books left right now. I actually, I finished this today, and earlier today I started reading the next book in the series, so I'm very excited to be continuing New Jedi Order and being so close to the end. So you can expect to see reviews for the last 2 books on the channel here very soon. So that's pretty much it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.